All right, welcome to Budget Hacks. This is the second Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar in our webinar series for 2024-2025. And my name is Andrea Pellegrini. I run the Student Money Management Center for the entire University of Illinois system out of the Bursar office. So I serve Urbana, Chicago, and Springfield students. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Kimber Beckler in IDFPR. Kimber, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello all. I'm very excited to be here. I am with IDFPR in the Division of Banking. I serve as their Deputy Director of Operations and Outreach. So I am excited to be here today with Andrea, and hopefully we have a great presentation.
Thank you so much, Kimber. We're blessed to have her co-presenting today. So collectively, the Get Savvy webinar team represents organizations across the state of Illinois, which rest on the ancestral lands of multiple Native nations, including the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasha nations. And we have a responsibility to acknowledge these nations and move forward with them towards a more vibrant and inclusive society. So I mentioned right before starting the recording that we are going to run this like a 3-ring circus, and we have a poll we're going to launch to get to know who is joining us today. So hopefully it popped up in the middle of your screen, or if you run multiple screens, it might be on one of your other screens. But if you respond, it helps us to maintain funding with some of our colleagues who are joining us or that help on the webinar series. It also helps us modify some of our discussion points to better meet the needs of our participants today. All right, so we have about 50% of people have participated. It looks like we have a big age range, students and full-time employees, and even some retired folks. Lots of other diversity going on. I'm only going to leave this open a couple more seconds, but if you can let me know or make sure to respond or hit the submit button, that helps us a lot. All right. Things have kind of stabilized out, so I'm going to end the poll. Just going to share real quick. You can see kind of who else is joining us today, see how diverse our attendee list is. I'm going to stop sharing, but if you still see the poll quiz box up, you can go ahead and exit out of that. And if we have another poll or quiz, it should pop up again. All right, so let's talk about the learning objectives. I said we were going to cover a lot of stuff today. So budgeting is a lot simpler in theory than in practice. So we're going to be discussing some ways to identify our spending priorities or what you might consider your needs. We're also going to talk about resources to leverage in a spending plan or budget to help you accomplish some of your goals. So we'll be talking about goal setting as well and some different frameworks for kind of thinking about goal setting. We're also going to identify a few methods of tracking expenses as well as your progress towards goals. And we're also going to be talking about psychology a little bit and how it plays a role in our spending choices. I was a psychology major, so I'm super excited or psyched about sharing some of the behavioral economics and psychology components with you today. And then we're also going to describe a few ways to reprioritize spending to meet your changing needs because life happens and we're dynamic individuals and sometimes we need to change things up and not be too strict with how we approach our goal setting and spending priorities. So we just want to kind of emphasize there's 3 basic parts of a budget. You typically have your income, your expenses, and your goals. And where it gets muddy is how we approach each of those components of a budget. So that's what we're going to focus on right now. So let's talk about identifying spending priorities and goals. So you may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is something that was created in the 1940s by Abraham Maslow, and it has 4 main assumptions associated with kind of needs. It assumes that needs are satisfied sequentially from the bottom of the hierarchy to the top. So the bottom of the hierarchy is physiological needs. Then it goes up to safety and security needs. then it goes up to love and belonging needs, then it goes up to self-esteem needs, and then it goes up to self-actualization needs. There's been a lot of research done in the last 80 years to add to this. So you might have seen different versions, but let's just talk about the 4 assumptions with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I just said that needs have to be satisfied sequentially. Income is relevant in the satisfaction needs, according to Maslow. Needs are also associated with well-being, which makes a lot of sense. And satisfying needs from the bottom up is the best or ideal approach, according to Maslow. However, more recent research that was done with a nationally represented data set from Mexico rejected basically all 4 of Maslow's main assumptions. And they highlighted that satisfaction of needs may not actually be sequential. Income is definitely still relevant, but only to meet physiological needs, not in any of the other needs in the hierarchy. And love and belonging and esteem specifically are important for a more integrated view of human needs. So, for example, a lot of people in this study had high level of satisfaction in higher order needs like love and belonging and safety and security, while needs in the lower orders like physiological needs were basically rated as precarious. So that's just to emphasize that needs are not very simple. They're not as simple as we like to assume they are, or historically have assumed that they are. So when we're talking about needs, the other thing that we need to mention is that basic need security impacts a lot of Americans. A lot of students specifically across the United States experience basic needs insecurity, especially for food and housing. So the USDA defines food security as readily available, nutritionally adequate, and safe foods, whereas HUD defines housing security as stable occupancy of a decent, safe, and affordable housing unit. And they use different scales because you can experience different levels of basic needs insecurity that we've shared in the chat. So big thanks to Richard for running the chat today, because there's a lot going on with our resources. So we need to emphasize as well that needs vary. If you're looking for kind of a simple way to define a need, something that I like to tell our attendees or students or other people that I help in building a budget is, if you want to define it simply, it's a need is something that if you went without it, it could jeopardize your health, your safety, or your livelihood. So if it impacts your ability to make money, if it impacts your ability to get nutritional food, those are all things that might be considered a need. Your values also influence what you consider or define as a need. So that means that they're individually very different. And it's also important that we recognize that our priorities can change as our roles change over time. For example, if you become a parent, your priorities and your needs will change exponentially as far as how you apply priorities in your budget or your spending plan. All right, so in addition to like our values, there are unconscious beliefs that we hold about money that can impact our spending priorities and our decisions and how we judge our spending decisions or even other people's spending decisions. So we're going to share in the chat this tool, thank you, Richard, called Money Scripts. It's a validated basically money personality inventory that helps you identify where maybe your unconscious biases lean. And that can help you both with discussing money with other people, as well as how you reflect on your own values and priorities and what money scripts might be helping you accomplish your wealth building goals or your stability goals, or what might be holding you back, and what might have worked a few years ago no longer works. So you can kind of reflect on what is in your best interest. So in thinking about reflection, we also want to talk about goal setting. So when you're trying to visualize a goal, you want it to be specific. You want it to be measurable so you can kind of identify where you're going to go. If you have other people that are helping you to accomplish this goal, you want to make sure it is agreed upon. When you consider your income, expenses, and other goals, is this particular goal realistic in context of all the other things you have going on in your life? And the time horizon of goals should also be kind of set up. But like I said, life happens, so it might need to be flexible. This behavioral economics concept called implementation intentions identifies that people are more likely to do something when they specify how, when, and where they will do it. So this SMART kind of framework helps us identify how, when, and where we're going to accomplish our goals, be that savings goals or debt repayment goals, or even just organization goals with getting our finances together. So if you've heard of the SMART framework, there are tons of different versions of it. So we've just kind of highlighted some of the common words associated with each letter in the acronym. So you can pick and choose what works for you. Choose your own adventure when it comes to your goal setting. You got to do something that is valuable to you, that you will be able to maintain motivation towards. All right, speaking of motivation, the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University did a study and found that people that were asked what percentage of their tax return they wanted to save before receiving their refund committed and saved more than people that were asked the same question either when they received their refund or shortly afterwards. And among those that saved more than 0% in both groups, people that pre-committed to saving saved 27%, and the control group, the ones that were asked this question after they got their refund, saved 17%. So in both cases, commitment helps them to save and actually accomplish their goals, because it took advantage of present bias. So pre-commitment makes use of our tendency to take a smaller reward now instead of waiting for a big reward later. And pre-commitment and setting up automatic savings helps us with long-term savings goals. So we wanted to highlight that. Another behavioral economics concept that we wanted to talk about is the fresh start effect. This is our tendency to pursue new goals following a temporal landmark, like, for example, your birthday, the start of the semester, New Year's resolutions. Those are all like temporal landmarks. And the theory behind this is that temporal landmarks allow us to think of our past selves and our current selves separately, providing a fresh start despite what we might have seen as previous failures. So you can use the many different transitions if you're in college as temporal landmarks to help you set financial goals or build healthier financial habits. So for example, if maybe last semester you wanted to grow your emergency savings, but you weren't able to accomplish that, this is a new semester. Take advantage of the fresh start effect. All right. So, another big component of prioritizing your goals is to determine that time portion, right? That's almost always what the T is referring to. So this can help you identify whether something is an immediate, short-term, midterm, or long-term goal. And these are timeframes that typically financial planners kind of work with. Because most of us have more than one goal and the timeframes kind of vary. Prioritizing your goals when you create your budget initially is pretty important, but it can also be challenging. So you may need to adjust your goals based on what you have going on at the time, or if something else comes up, right? So a goal could be less than a year away. We call that immediate. If it is 1 to 5 years, it's near future. If it's intermediate, it's usually within 5 to 10 years, and long term is 10 plus years. So usually people retirement in the long-term goal. If you have young children and you want to help them with college, that might be a long-term goal. So there are different categories of goals and timing of goals to consider. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of a breath because we're trying to get through so much great information. in such a short amount of time. But let's talk about identifying income and recognizing other resources that can help us accomplish our goals. So, when you think about managing money or creating a budget, the first thing you probably think of is how much your salary is or how much your paycheck averages out to be. Maybe what your take home pay is after taxes. That's called your net pay. So you might not think of other resources as income, but you can refer to things like community services or gifts or government assistance. Think of those things as well when you're thinking about what your needs are and what your goals are and how to accomplish those. So, for example, common income streams might be from our wages, but you might also have scholarships to help you pay for college or education. You might have investments that you're able to leverage as well for income, especially if they're paying dividends, for instance. Additionally, you might think about government assistance. So, a lot of Americans use government assistance programs to cover things like healthcare, food, and education costs. And we might not always think about these things as being part of our budget. So it's important that we're recognizing that now. Um, SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, helps millions of low-income individuals and families with paying for food. FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, gives us access to both grants and loans, but remember that loans are a type of income now that turns into debt. Well, it is debt, and it does have to be repaid later. So you just keep that in mind when you're leveraging these different resources to help you accomplish your goal. You might want to minimize the loans that you have to take out by trying to search for more scholarships, for example. And then we also have community resources, especially if we're in more urban areas. We might have more access to community resources compared to more rural areas. So libraries are a really great resource for professional development or education, entertainment, things like checking out books or music or movies. Sometimes libraries even have access to renting like videography or photography equipment if you want to test out if a new hobby is good for you, right? You might also think about other community resources like food pantries or shelters. If you are suffering from food insecurity and you're a student, each one of the universities in our system have student food pantries on campus. There's also a lot of community food pantries that help support students as well as the community. So it's a good idea to take advantage of those if you are suffering from basic needs insecurity. And don't forget about gifts, right? We sometimes forget about information, or we forget about funds from birthdays or holidays, or unfortunately, inheritance sometimes when we're thinking about our goals and our budgets in general. So I've spent a lot of time talking about income, but I do want to highlight that there's been a lot of research on income volatility over the year, which is a term used to describe income dips and spikes over a relatively short period of time. Usually it's defined as a 25% or more change in income annually. So, but it's important to recognize that certain industries are impacted more by this. For example, contract workers, hourly workers, seasonal workers, they might also be low income earners. And even just a 5% change paycheck to paycheck could be pretty dramatic. And it's also harder to engage in planning if you are someone in a field that has a lot of income volatility. Some things that I do want to highlight is that the older you are, the less income volatility you typically experience. So younger people tend to experience more volatility in their income. Females report more income volatility than males as well. People that are experiencing more income volatility also report making fewer financial planning decisions, regardless of their age, gender, education, or income level. So that is something that we want to highlight. It might be harder for you to get into a financial planning mindset if you have a lot of income volatility. And even if you perceive that you have more control over income volatility, that might increase your ability to think about financial planning or budgeting, but it may not on its own reduce the effects of higher volatility. For example, you might still experience basic needs insecurity, even though you have income volatility and you try to do financial planning. So that's not your fault. We live in a complicated world, and it's important to know of other resources that we have to help us overcome some of the hurdles related to income volatility. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Kimber so you can stop listening to me ramble a little bit.
Andrea, I will listen to you ramble every day. I'm just saying.
You're so kind, Kimber.
All right, everyone. So budgets can feel intimidating, but it's about being honest with yourself so you can get into realistic spending habits. Unfortunately, there's a lot of ways to incorporate a budget into your life. So when you start with your budget, you need to be able to label each of your expenses, fixed, flexible, or occasional. A fixed expense is something that is constant and usually associated with a contract, like a cell phone bill or your rent. A flexible expense is exactly how it sounds. It's a type of expense that fluctuates over time and is not constant. I can give an example of my electricity bill. I like to keep my house really cool in the summer, but if I would make it warmer, let it be warmer, I could save some money if I needed to. And it's usually a great place, flexible expense is a great place to cut spending if you need to. And an occasional expense are usually the ones that sneak up on you a little bit because they happen irregularly. These could be birthday gifts for family or friends, a vet visit for your wonderful pet, or other things like that. So now that we have a better understanding of what types of expenses we may encounter, let's play a game because Andrea and I love that. And let's take a poll. We're going to identify what kind of expense a particular item is.
So
So
I
go
just
ahead.
launched the poll. So you might have to scroll down. There's little icons associated with whichever expense you're trying to label as fixed, flexible, or occasional. So it looks like we got about 25% participated. Don't forget to hit submit when you're done.
We love participation. You get special points. Just saying.
Gold stars for everybody.
I know. That's what we like here. Or stickers. Just saying. All right, Andrea, how are we looking?
We got about 77% of people participated.
Okay,
All right,
we can make it.
submit in 5, 4, 3,
Yes,
2,
82.
1. Oh, we're up to 82, and we're going to end the poll and share the results. All right, are you ready to go over the results?
Okay, so fixed expenditures are like your rent and mortgage, savings goals, or cable, Netflix, or Hulu. A flexible expense is your utilities, transportation, groceries, or dining out. And an occasional expense are things like healthcare, need to go to the doctor's office, or hygiene supplies. Thanks everyone that participated. So another important part of your budget to consider is your cost of living in your area, especially for your rent. So this depends on a variety of factors. It depends on where you live, both from a municipality perspective as well as where within that municipality you choose to live. So like I can give an example in Springfield that if you live on the west side of town, you're going to have a much higher rate of rent because of property taxes, building, land, everything costs more over there than you would on the south side of town or the north side of town. So you want to take that into consideration whenever you're selecting a place to live. Also, the amount of bedrooms and space your rental property has, as well as the available amenities. So this graph uses average rent prices and demonstrates how rent can vary from around $500 a month to over $4,000 a month across Illinois, depending on where you live and the number of bedrooms in the rental property. So when you're choosing where to go to school or where to take your first job, this is a really important thing to consider. I work in state government, so conceivably you could have a job offered to you in Springfield and Chicago where you could choose which one, but the pay would be the same. So your money can go further in Springfield and get probably more space, but you might have more access to activities and concerts and sporting events in Chicago. So that's something to take an important consideration of when you're preparing your budget and making big decisions. Also, when you're tracking your food, you may notice that your food costs, or when you're tracking your food, when you're tracking your spending, sorry, you may notice that your food costs vary drastically. So you want to probably start tracking your food the cost of your food that you eat at home versus eating out to see where that money is going. We're going to put a link to the USDA food plans in the chat so you can check out the tables for yourself, which have a lot more information. But the food plans from the USDA from July 2024 varied between $260 to $980, depending on your age, gender, and family makeup. And because the cost of food varies so much, the USDA publishes this chart every month, and July is the most recent table we have available. And we're also going to include in the chat some additional resources for controlling the cost of food, including a link to Illinois SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And another helpful hint is that if you live on a college campus, make sure you're reviewing your meal plan to ensure that you're getting the most out of it. Check with your school to see if you can choose a lower cost option at the beginning of the semester, and that if you need to, you can increase that option depending on your individual needs and the resources you have available to you. Okay, so another important part of a budget is an emergency savings goal. And I really want, this looks overwhelming at first, but I think that it's important to take into consideration that small amounts that you can contribute to your savings really add up over the long run. So just for an example, it's important to recognize that many Americans can't cover a $400 expense without borrowing or selling something they own. So even saving to getting to that point of $400 in, available funding, if in case your car breaks down or you have a vet appointment or something along those lines, that puts you ahead of most Americans. So that's a doable amount. When you start thinking about bigger goals, like the recommended 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, it can seem overwhelming, but just know that when you get to that $400 part, you can start getting to the saving for 1 month at a time. So start small, save securely, put your money in a bank, and keep going, because little amounts do add up. So in our chat, we want to talk to you real quick. What are some tools that you use to track your budget? What has worked or what hasn't worked for you in the past?
This is always one of my favorite parts of our budget webinars, when we ask from the audience to participate in the chat and tell us all your secrets.
We love
right?
secrets. So
we love secrets.
Yes, and we can share them with others. But it's funny because see, Melissa said it. Andrea and I we're preparing for all this, and I pulled out my little pink notebook that says budget on the front, and I use that and I love it, and it's very old school. So
I've test driven several different budgeting methods and tools. I like apps that automate a lot of the tracking for me and kind of show me some trends, so I can see if like my behaviors in eating out have increased during certain times of the year, for example, or certain months. But I also have a partner, and sometimes we have to have shared goals and shared conversations. So I also use Google Sheets now, in addition to my automation, my apps. So it looks like a lot of people use Google Sheets.
I know. I maybe need to look
apps.
into that. The apps I like.
Pen and paper. We
Pen and
got some
paper,
calendar folks too.
My people.
Excellent.
Right.
Keep them coming.
We love it. So I'm going to feel free to keep going in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and keep going so we can keep the time moving. So setting a goal and not tracking your progress isn't going to get you anywhere. But alternatively, the same method of tracking spending isn't going to work for everyone. So just like you see in the chat, people all have, different dynamic ways to keep track of their budget. So here's a few methods. Envelope budgeting. This is an old school method of budgeting where you have different envelopes for different categories of spending. Then you can put enough cash in that envelope to cover what you anticipate to spend that month. But the trick is that once you're out of the cash, you're done spending in that category for the month. So there's also an electronic version of this method called Good Budget. It's an app where you set your spending habits electronically and then manually record your purchase amounts in the app as you spend throughout the month. And this might be a safer way of setting spending limits than carrying all of your cash around with you all the time. Also, calendar budgeting. I know we saw a lot of responses that referenced that in the chat. This is using a calendar and color coding expenses. So you can anticipate each month some of your expenses like rent and utilities, your car payment, your credit card bill, but also making sure that you're incorporating things like a friend's birthday or going to that concert that you want to see, except Area knows I can't afford Taylor Swift. It's very, very heartbreaking.
You want it to so bad. Maybe it's a goal for you.
It's a goal that will never happen, but I cheer for her in spirit. And you can set up payday alerts. It's really nice to have those notifications that come through, not that you just owe money, but hey, you have money put into your account. That's a good positive reinforcement. So it's a visual supplement to tracking your money. There's also spreadsheets and other electronic methods, like definitely was discussed in the chat, that are very helpful. And there are literally hundreds of apps you can use in other programs, or just download your Excel templates. Smartphone apps out there help you track your expenses, and you can check with your financial institution to see if the app that they utilize helps you have it built in, if it has a built-in expense tracking feature in their banking app. So you can compare that to other apps to see what serves you best. And whatever app you choose, just make sure it has bank level security, and that if it allows connection to your accounts, and make sure that you're keeping it updated to avoid security issues. And the last thing is, tried and true that I love is pen and paper and pencil budgeting. If you're not familiar with the concept of a check register or balancing your checkbook, this is the method of basically writing down all of your purchases physically and comparing it to your bank statements at the end of the month. And definitely you can use a combination of these methods. Remember, it's what works best for you and helps you meet your goals. So there are a lot of different budget strategies and templates and philosophies out there. And here are just a few examples coupled with apps that have features that seem to align well with each of the strategies or philosophies that we have listed. So the 50-20-30 method, Elizabeth Warren wrote about this in her book, All Your Worth, the Ultimate Lifetime Money Plan. It's where 50% of your net after tax pay is for essential needs, 20% is for financial goals like saving or debt repayment, and 30% is for wants or what may be called discretionary spending. And Time Magazine recently did an article about the nuances of applying this budget strategy in today's economy. And if that sounds like a fit to you, there's several apps that utilize that system, like the Buddy app, Budget 50, or Money Win. If you're more interested in zero-based budgeting, why you need a budget, WYNAB, or every dollar, this is where every expense needs to be justified so that when you subtract expenses from your income, it equals zero. In this method, you give every single dollar a job. It's similar to business accounting in a lot of ways. Another version is traditional budgeting, where you take your annual net income and subtract your monthly, quarterly, and annual expenses from it. This requires you to track your actual income and expenses and adjust your estimates for the next pay period based on what actually happened, which you should be doing with any budgeting system or philosophy that you use. There's others available, but just for the sake of time, we're going to move on. But I want to promote our Making Sense of Money podcast, where we go into detail about all these different budget strategies if you are interested. So popular app features that you should consider, there's so many different ones, you have to kind of narrow it down. And there's lots that can make it easier for you to put your information all into one place It can help set automatic alerts and notifications and help you keep on track with setting goals. Do your research, see which one works best for you. And my disclaimer that Andrea has heard me preach about with all these graphs I showed her, be aware that a lot of these apps offer free trial periods for the first month or the first week, somewhere along there. So don't sign up for like 8 and then forget that you subscribed and get charged the full amount. That is not helpful. So, but there's lots of free options as well. So just try to find ones that work for you, and don't forget to delete the ones. You don't want a lot of different apps having access to all of your financial information anyway without you being aware and being active in that app. I mean, I've tried a lot of apps and I keep preaching. My notebook and my bank app with my calendar is my favorite. So back, just to positively reiterate, there's no one size fits all to expense management. Your needs and wants are going to vary by individual, by your situation, and over time, because like Andrea said earlier, as you get older, your needs and wants and goals change. So just be able to be flexible with that, and just be aware that each of these apps or the different philosophies are going to contain different financial terms to refer to expenses such as essential needs, discretionary spending, financial goals. So just be aware that there is some terminology out there that can differ from philosophy to philosophy. So there's a lot of different ways to prioritize having multiple goals at the same time. Most of us have them, but it means there's lots of options or opinions about how to best utilize them too. Some common suggestions on prioritizing goals include establishing emergency savings first, which we kind of talked about how to get to that emergency savings amount. Contributing to your retirement. You want to maximize any match your employer offers and take advantage of the compounding interest. And just take into consideration that if you're able to save $1 and your employer contributes $1, that's another form of another resource available to you, another form of payment. And you can add that to your savings without putting so much of your own money in at the same time. Also, paying down high interest debt. High interest is typically considered anything higher than the current average federal loan or mortgage rate. So right now, mortgage rates are right around 6.5%. So anything above that would be considered high interest. You also need to make a list of other goals to consider, including the cost, time frame, and the need, and the tools you need to help you reach those goals. And as always, if you need additional help, you can consider hiring a financial professional, but be sure that you're taking advantage of resources available to you by your university or community, which you obviously all know to do because you're doing so in this very moment. And we appreciate you being here with us. And another shameless plug, if you want to hear more of me and Andrea, please tune into our Making Sense of Money podcast. We release it every 2 weeks, and you can listen through all of your favorite platforms. We cover tough financial topics and make them easier for you to understand, and we try to make them entertaining as well. So be sure to check that out. Okay, so let's talk about what good budgeting approaches have in common. They combine expense tracking, planning, and flexibility. So when you're tracking, be realistic with yourself and your actual behavior and how you're going to spend money. When you're planning, be sure to include your goals and how you're going to give the length of time you're going to give yourself to achieve them, as well as your financial tool selection, making sure that you have insurance, those things as well, that make sure that you have some coverage available to you, as well as being flexible with yourself. Like I said before, life happens. Andrea said that too. Be flexible with yourself and don't be too hard on yourself. Okay, back to Andrea.
All right, I got a little excited about talking about impulse spending. So
it's my favorite topic.
So let's talk about impulse spending and how we can recognize when it's happening and combat maybe some of the negative components of impulse spending. So why do you think that we impulse spend? If you can put in the chat, why you think that in general humans impulse spend? This is a more challenging question than we've asked in the past. It's a nice dopamine rush. Yep. Stress, Family, friends are doing it with socializing. Yes, that dopamine hit from their childhood. We feel bad. We feel good. We got holidays. We think more stuff equals happiness, consumerism, materialism,
These people are, you
discounts.
guys are really wonderful participants. I want to give you a
Yes,
shout out. Thanks for being so interactive. Cute stuff. Melissa,
cute
I
stuff.
feel you.
We want when we want it. All right. So, there was a meta analysis done because I'm a nerd. I read the whole thing. It took me a week, but I did it. But basically, there are both internal factors and external influences that can impact our impulse spending. So, individual traits, motives, and resources actually have more to do with your likelihood to engage in impulse spending than external influences like marketing stimuli. So, for example, some people are just more impulsive than other people. Likewise, some people have more self control than others to curb that uh, impulsiveness. And it's also important to recognize that your capacity for self control and your emotions can also influence spending decisions. I talk about self control, and I want to emphasize that self control is not a finite resource or a trait. If you're tired or you're upset or you're hangry, you may have less energy or capacity to engage in self control to curb those impulses. The other thing that I want to emphasize that unlike what a lot of people think, your age and gender don't actually seem to be correlated with your likelihood to engage in impulse spending. Some of us like to generalize, oh, women are more likely to impulse spend, or young people are more likely to impulse spend. There's actually no relationship between age or gender and impulse spending. Um, and marketing is successful when it speaks to our desires to pursue pleasure or avoid pain, or that highlights the practical benefits or rewards of a specific purchase we might be considering. And that can push us over the edge to impulse spend. Because if marketing around a product appeals to how we view our ideal selves, it can be more influential in encouraging us to make impulsive purchases. So, knowing ourselves, being reflective, and recognizing when marketing is appealing to what we think of as our ideal selves can help us curb some of those impulse spending. The other thing that I want to highlight in psychology is concept of decision fatigue, which is also similar to ego depletion, if you've heard of that in behavioral economics. This is typically recognized as the diminished ability of a person to make sound decisions after a long period of decision making. So this can also erode our capacity for self-control. There was another study done, and they found that someone with more economic resources might not take a lot of time, for example, to decide on which loaf of bread to buy when they go to the grocery store. However, someone who is at or below the poverty level might spend a lot of time comparing prices and values to make sure they're making a good purchasing decision. So basically, the more high stress, high stakes decision a person makes throughout the day, the worse their decisions tend to be by the end of the day. And it's just because we only have so much capacity or energy, and different emotions or frequency of decision making can impact that capacity. So give yourself some grace once in a while. A few ways that you can reduce impulse spending include reward substitution. So we like immediate rewards. Like someone said, we want what we want when we want it, and we want. This immediate rewards appeals to our impulsive nature, and we can use it to motivate behaviors that are beneficial in the long run. For example, maybe like after you scored really high on a test, instead of going to buy yourself ice cream, you let yourself play video games, your favorite video game, for a couple hours, right? So you can do reward substitutions to curb some impulse spending. Obviously, being aware of marketing tactics, both in stores and online, can help us curb some of the appeal to hedonic or utilitarian motivations, which makes us more likely to impulse spend, right? If they're appealing to our ideal selves. You also want to know what your triggers are and identify ways to redirect some of those impulse urges. For example, maybe you phone a friend when you're thinking about buying something that just went on sale, or maybe you refocus on what your actual goals are and kind of assess where does this impulse purchase fit in our goals, or you might frame the cost of something based on what your values are. For example, sometimes I will think about a cost it as how much of a regular bill that I have is this going to cost me? So if I see a new jacket, I'm like, oh, I like that. I want a jacket. I might think, okay, that jacket costs the same amount of money as what it will cost me to pay my cell phone bill. So you reframing can also help identify what you're going to miss out on potentially if you engage in that impulse spending. All right, some other traps based on our biases that I wanted to mention. Uh, Default bias is we like to pick the easy option to avoid complex decision. Where this can kind of be a problem is, for instance, if we have to take an action to enroll in an employer match program for retirement benefits, we're less likely to enroll in that because I have to take an action. If the default action is you're automatically enrolled and you have to take action to get out of it, you're going to be more likely to contribute to retirement with your employer. The endowment effect, this is where we overvalue what we own. So, for example, if you're trying to diversify your income by selling stuff that you own because you no longer need it, you may have difficulty selling it quickly because other people are not going to value that the same amount that you do because you own it currently. Hyperbolic discounting, this is where we tend to put a very high value on the here and now and a very low value on the future. This is part of why we are super bad at delayed gratification as in general. So recognizing that can help us curb some of those impulse spending as well. What am I taking away from my future self if I engage in impulse spending now? The money illusion is where we confuse actual dollar amounts with the buying power of dollars. This is relevant for mental accounting that Thaler talked about. It's a philosophy that we value if we value dollars differently based on where they're coming from or how we intend to use them, that is contributing to a money illusion. Thaler suggested that we treat every dollar the same, whether it's coming from an inheritance, whether it's coming from birthday money, because sometimes we view birthday money as free money. I don't have to use it towards my goals, right? And sometimes you can reward yourself so it doesn't feel like you're always restricting yourself, but being aware of that can help you balance where you need to. All right. It's also a big issue with inflation. Money illusion makes it difficult for a lot of people to understand the impacts of inflation on buying power. Opportunity cost neglect. This is where we tend to ignore what we give up when we make decisions. Earlier, I talked about reframing your expenses based on what maybe you value most. This helps us to avoid opportunity cost neglect and think about our future selves as well. And if I have, for example, a surprise opportunity to take advantage of, I might compare that to what I might be missing out on. Am I missing out on work, income from work if I go to a surprise concert, for example, in addition to the cost of the ticket itself? So that can sometimes help us, knowing that that exists can sometimes help us with curbing some expenses. The ostrich effect applies to some of us who worry we've maybe fallen off track and we don't want to know how bad we're doing. And this is where you tend to ignore because you don't want to know. You don't want to know how bad your budget went because we tend to idealize ourselves and we underestimate costs. So this can be a difficult thing to overcome. So when you're writing down your budget, when you're making a plan, don't be aware that we often underestimate what we're going to spend on things, especially those occasional expenses and flexible expenses. Don't set yourself up to fail, but also give yourself some grace when things don't go how you planned. All right. Talk to us about applying budget hacks, Kimber.
All right, I'm ready. And I'm also paying attention to the clock, everyone. So just know that I'm doing that. All right, we've discussed a lot of strategies for putting together your budget. Let's take to mind a few other considerations. Highlights so far: your income. Don't forget that your job and maybe financial support from your family members if you're in school and you've agreed to a certain amount each month from your family. But remember things like gift cards, even cash back options on your credit card, and employer benefits. Like I said before, if your employer matches you dollar for dollar in retirement, that can be viewed as another form of income. Also, remember that when you're spending, think about what you could be potentially saving on. This includes doing things like couponing, DIY on repairs or home improvements, or even cooking for yourself as opposed to dining out. Investing a little time and energy into researching or comparing costs before you make purchases can go a long way. And Andrea hears me say this all the time. A helpful hint: YouTube has saved me literally thousands of dollars on car repairs. I repaired so many things on my Jeep down to my steering wheel because I would watch a bunch of YouTube videos that are free, and then I could do it myself versus having to pay someone to do it. In your debt, this is an important consideration. Remember that it's costly, but there's ways of making it more affordable. Consider each of the credit card interests that you use if you're carrying a balance, and see if the benefits of the card, like cashback options or travel points, are helping you with what your goals are. And remember that while credit card incentives can be very rewarding, the interest rates on balances carried over can vastly diminish the value of what you're getting when you earn those points. Okay, so budgeting can be difficult, but if you're neurodivergent, it can cause even more stress and anxiety when it comes to creating a budget. 1 in 5 people in the United States, or approximately 65.6 million individuals, live with a neurological disability, which can impact how we think. Only 46% of working age adults with attention and learning disabilities are employed, and these adults are twice as likely to be jobless than their peers. 62% of employees who have a disability have an invisible disability, which is one where the people can't tell when you meet them. And of these people, only a few of them will share their disability with their supervisor or manager. 39% of people will do that with their team, 24%, or with their human resources department, only 21%. So just be aware that that is something that, people may experience, and that's okay. You're not alone if you are one of these people. 27% of neurodiverse people admit to a lack of confidence in managing their money versus 18% of neurotypical individuals. And 15% of neurodiverse people are debt-free versus 39% of those who are neurotypical. So there is proven effects. So what are some budget hacks? If you are neurodivergent, automate your bills as much as possible, and this helps with late fees and missed payments. It also helps alleviate the struggle with working memory. Set alerts and reminders, and this helps in apps and your phone, lots of different ways. Set up these payment reminders to make sure you know when each payment is due, because those, overdue costs, they can add up quickly. Keep important paperwork in your line of sight. If you put it in a drawer or in a desk, it makes it less likely to get done or get added to your to-do list. Log out of shopping apps to reduce impulsive spending. I don't care who you are. This is a great idea. If you log out of Amazon and take all your credit card information out of it, it makes it a lot less easy to just push buy it now, and is very helpful with helping impulsive spending. And be sure to ask for help if you need it, because there's family members, close friends, or even financial advisors and therapists and coaches that can help establish a routine for you to follow so that you can get started on that budget process. And be aware, as you guys all are, of programs and services that are available to you through your community or university. These are great habits, though, for everyone to get into. not just neurodivergent individuals, but neurotypical individuals as well. Another quick way to save money without feeling that big pang is of loss is to try the step down method. So if you're going out to eat 4 times a week, try doing it just 2 times a week. You're able to save money toward your goals, but you don't feel like you had to quit everything cold turkey. And then if you feel comfortable with it 2 times a week, you can cut it down even more. This is very helpful in a lot of different budgeting strategies. Okay, so wrapping it all together, you guys, be aware of how your spending habits and be realistic with yourself with what you're going to do and be proactive to overcome those tendencies, just like the example I gave about taking out your credit card information out of apps and logging out of them. Make it a little bit more difficult on yourself if you're prone to impulsive spending. Set goals that are attainable and start small. Track your progress. You can elevate your goals as you gain confidence in your achievements. And as Andrew mentioned earlier, if what you're doing doesn't work, utilize the fresh start effect. Try something different, start over new. You can do it with a new strategy. Andrea, it's your turn.
All right, so thank you for joining us. Our next webinar is on side hustles in small businesses on October 3rd. If you did not register for that or you forgot to, we put the link to register for that and future webinars in our chat. Thank you, Richard. We also post all of our webinar recordings to YouTube, so you can check out that. We will post this one once it's captioned. It will probably take us a little bit longer to get this one captioned, but we'll send it out to all registrants and post it to our YouTube channel once it's available. We also have tons of collaborators on the Get Savvy webinar series, so we want to thank them, and you can keep in contact with us as well. We'll stick around for questions, but if anyone needs to head out to get lunch or to go to their next thing or meeting, please feel free to leave. We'll stick around for a few more minutes, but thank you again for being so active in our polling and the chat. We really appreciate when we have an interactive group of participants.
And just as a side note, don't forget to tune in to Andrea and I on Making Sense of Money podcast for additional financial information about other hacks and theories and obviously banter between the two of us when we aren't so constrained on time.
Absolutely.